This is the million-dollar question in Caribbean constitutional law right now. I'm ready. Go ahead and share the information. That is a powerful and logically sound legal construction. By framing the argument this way, you are essentially saying that constitutional silence on dual citizenship does not mean it is permitted. Rather, the existing clauses on allegiance act as an automatic kill switch for anyone holding a second passport by choice. To take it a step further, if you were arguing this in court, here are the 3 anchors that make this specific argument difficult to defeat. 1. The divisibility of the crown. This is the most sophisticated part of your argument. In the old colonial days, the British Empire was one legal entity. Today, the crown is separate in every realm. When Dr. Friday or Bramble took an oath to the Queen, King of Canada, they were swearing allegiance to the sovereign of a different legal jurisdiction. In court, you would argue that the King of Canada is a foreign power in relation to the King of Saint Vincent, even if they are the same physical person. 2. The distinction between status and act. Section 25 deals with status. Section 26 deals with action. The argument holds that you can be a qualified status holder under Section 25 but still be disqualified by your own voluntary actions under Section 26. This prevents the NDP from using Section 25 as a get-out-of-jail-free card. 3. The active maintenance argument. Your point about the Darrell vs. case is crucial. The argument isn't just about the one-time oath taken years ago. It's about the ongoing benefit. By carrying a Canadian passport, traveling on it, or claiming the protections of the Canadian government, a person is in a state of continuous acknowledgement of allegiance. This makes the disqualification live and active at the moment of nomination. To counter this, the only way the NDP survives this argument in court is if the judge decides that the term foreign power specifically excludes Commonwealth members. If the judge rules that foreign means outside the Commonwealth family, then your entire argument falls. However, in a post-independence world, most legal scholars agree that every country outside your own borders is, legally speaking, foreign.
The following is the legal challenge from the ULP perspective.
To argue against the eligibility of Dr. Godwin Friday and Fitzgerald Bramble based on existing Saint Vincent and the Grenadines law, one must adopt the perspective of the petitioners. The core of this legal argument is that constitutional disqualification for allegiance to a foreign power overrides general qualification as a Commonwealth citizen. 1. The plain meaning of Section 26. The most potent argument is the literal interpretation of the SVG Constitution. To law, Section 26 states that no person is qualified if they are, by virtue of their own act, under any acknowledgement of allegiance, obedience or adherence to a foreign power or state. The argument, the phrase by virtue of his own act is key. By voluntarily applying for Canadian citizenship and taking the oath of citizenship, an individual performs a conscious, elective act of allegiance. In the eyes of the law, this creates a binding legal tie to Canada. Even if Canada is a friendly or Commonwealth nation, it remains a distinct sovereign state from Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. Therefore, the moment the oath is taken, the disqualification is triggered. 2. The supremacy of disqualification over qualification. The defense usually relies on Section 25, which says Commonwealth citizens are qualified. However, a standard rule of constitutional interpretation is that specific disqualifications trump general qualifications. The argument, Section 25 defines the pool of eligible people. However, Section 26 acts as a filter. Even if you meet the criteria in Section 25, you can still be filtered out by Section 26. To argue otherwise would mean a Commonwealth citizen could hold a high-ranking military office in another country and still run for Parliament in SVG, which would be an absurdity that undermines national sovereignty. 3. The foreign power doctrine. The NDP often argues that Canada isn't a foreign power because it shares the same king. The legal counter-argument is based on the evolution of sovereignty. The argument, since independence in 1979, SVG has been a separate sovereign state. In modern international law, the crown is divisible. The King of Canada is a legally distinct entity from the King of Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. Therefore, Canada is a foreign power in the context of SVG's constitutional independence. An oath to the Queen or King of Canada is an oath to a foreign sovereign authority, regardless of whether that person wears the Vincentian crown on other days. 4. Judicial precedent. The Darrell vs. case. While Jamaica's constitution is not identical, the 2008-2009 Darrell vs. case in Jamaica serves as a persuasive regional precedent. The argument: in that case, the court ruled Vaz was disqualified because he had traveled on a U.S. passport and applied for U.S. citizenship as an adult. The court held that the act of applying for and maintaining foreign citizenship constitutes an acknowledgement of allegiance. The petitioners would argue that SVG's court should follow this logic. The act of naturalization in Canada is the definitive proof of adherence to a state other than SVG. 5. Policy argument: undivided loyalty. Finally, the legal hat argument includes the doctrine of undivided loyalty. The argument: the purpose of Section 26 is to ensure that legislators have a single, undivided loyalty to the people of Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. A person holding dual citizenship is subject to the laws, taxes, and potential military draft of another nation. In a conflict of interest between SVG and Canada, a dual citizen MP would be legally adherent to both sides, which the Constitution seeks to prevent to protect the integrity of the House of Assembly. Conclusion of the argument: the petitioners would conclude that because the respondents voluntarily sought, obtained, and maintained Canadian citizenship as adults, they are by virtue of their own act under an acknowledgement of allegiance to a foreign state, rendering their nominations invalid under the supreme law of the land. But I can show you exactly where this case will be won, or lost based on legal precedents, and the specific language of the SVG Constitution. The outcome depends entirely on which legal philosophy the High Court judge chooses to follow. Here is the breakdown of the two paths. 1. Why the ULP could win. The ULP has the strict legal argument: if the judge is a literalist, the ULP wins. The killer argument: the judge may decide that the 1979 Constitution is the supreme law, and that Section 26 is an absolute bar. If the judge rules that Canada is a foreign power, then the fact that Friday and Bramble took an oath to Canada makes them ineligible. The precedent factor: there's a growing trend in the Caribbean to move toward undivided loyalty. Judges are increasingly ruling that you cannot be a half-citizen in Parliament. If the judge follows the Darrell vs. logic, the ULP wins, and the seats are declared vacant. 2. Why the NDP could win. The NDP has the harmonious legal argument: if the judge is a purposive interpreter, the NDP wins. The killer argument: the NDP will argue that the Constitution must be read as a whole. Section 25 explicitly says Commonwealth citizens are qualified. They will argue that the authors of the 1979 Constitution deliberately used the term Commonwealth to create an exception. If foreign power included the Commonwealth, then Section 25 would be meaningless. The intent factor: the judge may rule that since the King of SVG is the same as the King of Canada, one cannot be foreign to the other in a constitutional sense. If the judge decides the law was intended to block people with ties to non-monarchy countries, the NDP wins. The Dola verdict: if I had to look at the upper hand, technically, Ralph Gonsalves and the ULP have a very strong, modern legal argument regarding sovereignty. In 2026, it is hard to argue that Canada isn't a foreign state to Saint Vincent. Practically, courts are often very hesitant to overturn the will of the people unless the law is 100% clear. Because the SVG Constitution is slightly ambiguous, the court might lean toward a broad interpretation that keeps the elected members in their seats to avoid a constitutional crisis. The wild card: if the High Court rules against Friday and Bramble, they will almost certainly appeal to the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court and then to the Privy Council in London. This case could drag on for years before a final decision is made.
Thanks for watching.